The lantern swayed in Wyatt Northwood's calloused hand as he pushed open the stable door that October night in 1876, expecting nothing more than the familiar scent of hay and the soft breathing of his horses. But instead, he froze at the sight of a young woman curled in the corner of an empty stall, her threadbare dress torn at the hem and her dark hair spilling across the straw like ink on parchment. She stirred at the creak of the door, her eyes flying open with the wild terror of a cornered animal. In the flickering lamplight, Wyatt could see the exhaustion carved into her features, the hollow shadows beneath her cheekbones, the way her fingers trembled as she scrambled to her feet. "I'm sorry," she gasped, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I'll leave right now. I just needed somewhere warm for the night. I didn't mean any harm. I swear I didn't touch anything. I'll go immediately." The words tumbled out in a frantic rush as she gathered the small bundle of belongings at her feet, a cloth sack that looked like it contained nothing more than perhaps a change of clothes and whatever meager possessions she'd managed to carry. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it twice. Wyatt held up his free hand, his voice coming out gentler than he'd intended. "Hold on now. No need to rush off into the cold." She paused, her eyes meeting his with such desperate hope that something twisted in his chest. Up close, he could see she was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, with eyes the color of warm honey and a delicate face that would have been beautiful if not marred by obvious hunger and fatigue. "I don't have money," she said quietly, her chin lifting with what remained of her pride. "I can't pay you for shelter, but I can work. I'm a hard worker, I promise. I can clean, cook, mend clothes, anything you need." "What's your name?" Wyatt asked, setting the lantern on a hook by the door. "Delilah," she said after a moment's hesitation. "Delilah Rae." "Well, Miss Rae, I'm Wyatt Northwood. This is my stable attached to my ranch just outside Newton, and I'm not asking for payment." He studied her carefully, noting the way she kept glancing toward the door as if planning an escape route. "You look like you haven't eaten in days. When did you last have a proper meal?" Her throat worked as she swallowed. "I had some bread yesterday morning, or maybe it was the day before. I'm not entirely certain anymore." Wyatt felt his jaw tighten. The Kansas prairie could be unforgiving, especially as autumn deepened toward winter. Newton had grown considerably since the railroad came through 5 years earlier, bringing with it cattle drives and all manner of people seeking new lives out west. But it had also brought danger, poverty, and plenty of folks who fell through the cracks. "Come up to the house," he said, making his decision. "I've got stew left from dinner and fresh bread. You can eat something warm and then we'll figure out what comes next." "I couldn't possibly impose," Delilah protested, but her eyes betrayed her, flickering toward the stable door that led to his ranch house with naked longing. "You're not imposing, I'm offering." Wyatt picked up the lantern again. "Besides, it's too cold out here tonight. Frost is coming in hard. You'll freeze before morning." He could see the war playing out across her face, pride battling with survival. Finally, survival won. She nodded, clutching her small bundle against her chest like a shield. Wyatt led her across the yard to his house, a modest 2-story structure he'd built himself 3 years ago when he'd finally saved enough to buy this land. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, with good bones and a stone fireplace that kept the main room warm even in the depths of winter. Inside, he stirred the embers in the fireplace and added more wood, coaxing the flames back to life while Delilah hovered uncertainly near the door. He could feel her watching him as he moved to the stove and ladled stew into a bowl, slicing generous portions of bread to go with it. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the rough-hewn table that dominated one side of the room. She obeyed, setting her bundle on the floor beside her chair. When he placed the food in front of her, he saw tears gather in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means." "Eat," he said simply, taking a seat across from her with his own bowl, though he'd already eaten hours ago. He figured she might feel less self-conscious if he joined her. Delilah ate slowly at first, as if trying to maintain some semblance of dignity, but hunger soon won out. She finished the first bowl quickly and Wyatt refilled it without comment. By the time she'd eaten her fill, some color had returned to her cheeks and the desperate edge had faded from her eyes. "Thank you," she said again, her voice stronger now. "I promise I'll repay your kindness somehow." Wyatt leaned back in his chair, studying her. She was a puzzle, this young woman who'd ended up sleeping in his stable. Her speech was educated, her manners refined despite her obvious hardship. She wasn't some drifter born to poverty. Something had happened to bring her to this point. "How long have you been on the road?" he asked. Delilah's fingers traced the grain of the wooden table. 3 weeks, maybe 4. I lost track somewhere in Missouri." "That's a long way to travel alone. Where are you headed?" "Anywhere that's not where I came from." Her voice turned brittle. "I had planned to go to California, but I ran out of money in Kansas City. I've been working my way west however I could, taking odd jobs when anyone would hire me. But Newton doesn't seem to have much use for a woman traveling alone." That was probably true, Wyatt reflected. Newton had calmed down considerably since its wildest days as a cattle town, but it was still a rough place in many ways. A woman alone, with no family and no connections, would struggle to find respectable work. "What happened to bring you out here?" he asked carefully. "If you don't mind my asking." Delilah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady but he could hear the pain underneath. "I was engaged to be married. To a man my father chose, Charles Pemberton, from a good Boston family with money and connections. My father is, or was, a banker. He saw the marriage as a business arrangement more than anything else." She paused, her hands clenching in her lap. "Charles seemed kind enough during our courtship, though it was always carefully chaperoned. But after the engagement was announced, he started showing his true nature. He was controlling, possessive. He told me I wouldn't be allowed to see my friends after we married, that I wouldn't need to waste my time with books or music or anything I enjoyed. That my only purpose would be to run his household and bear his children." Wyatt felt his hands curl into fists under the table. He'd known men like that. Hell, he'd had a father like that, which was part of why he'd left home at 17 and never looked back. "When I tried to tell my father I wanted to end the engagement, he refused to listen," Delilah continued. "He said I was being hysterical and foolish, that Charles would be a good husband and I should be grateful such a man wanted to marry me. The wedding was set for September 15th. "And you ran," Wyatt said. "I ran," she confirmed. "The night before the wedding. I took what little money I'd saved from my mother's jewelry, the pieces she'd left me before she died, and I bought a train ticket west. I didn't even pack properly. I just grabbed what I could carry and left." She looked up at him, her honey-colored eyes fierce. "I won't apologize for it. I won't spend my life trapped in a cage, even a gilded one." "I'm not asking you to apologize," Wyatt said quietly. "Sounds to me like you made the right choice." Some of the tension left her shoulders. "My father will be looking for me, though. He has connections, money to hire investigators. That's why I've been moving, never staying anywhere too long. I thought if I could just get far enough away, start over somewhere new with a different name, I could finally be free. And instead, you ended up sleeping in my stable." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Not my finest moment, I'll admit, but I've slept in worse places these past weeks." The smile faded. "I truly am grateful for your kindness, Mr. Northwood. Most people don't look twice at someone like me." They see a woman alone and assume the worst. "Call me Wyatt," he said, "and I meant what I said out there. Stay as long as you need." Delilah stared at him. "I couldn't possibly accept such generosity. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Wyatt said. "I know you're running from something that scared you enough to leave everything behind. I know you're trying to survive with nothing but your wits and determination. And I know what it's like to be alone in the world with nowhere to turn." He stood, moving to add more wood to the fire. "I've got a spare room upstairs. It's not much, just a bed and a dresser, but it's warm and dry. You can stay there while you figure out your next move." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Delilah asked, her voice wavering between hope and suspicion. "What do you want in return?" Wyatt turned to face her, understanding the fear behind the question. "Nothing improper if that's what you're worried about. I'm offering you a place to stay, food to eat, and honest work if you want it. That's all. No strings attached." She searched his face for a long moment, looking for deception or hidden motives. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "All right. I'll stay for a few days if you're certain it's not an imposition, and I will work to earn my keep." "I wasn't lying about being a hard worker." "I don't doubt it," Wyatt said. "Come on, I'll show you the room." He led her upstairs, carrying the lantern to light their way. The spare room was at the end of the short hallway, small but clean. He'd built the furniture himself, the bed frame and dresser made from sturdy oak. Clean linens were already on the bed, because he tried to keep the room ready even though he rarely had visitors. "There's a washstand with fresh water," he said, gesturing to the corner. "And I'll bring up some extra blankets. Gets cold up here at night." Delilah set her bundle on the bed, running her hand over the quilt with something like wonder. "This is more than I expected. Thank you, Wyatt." The sound of his name on her lips did something strange to his chest, but he ignored it. "Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning about what kind of work you might be interested in doing around here." He left her there and went back downstairs, banking the fire for the night and tidying the kitchen. As he worked, he found himself thinking about the young woman now sleeping under his roof. There was something about Delilah that called to him, some combination of vulnerability and strength that made him want to protect her, to give her the safety and security she'd been denied. It was foolish, probably. He'd known her for all of an hour. She'd likely stay a few days, rest and recover, and then move on to wherever she was headed. He'd be left alone again in his quiet house with his horses and his small ranch and the life he'd built for himself out here on the Kansas prairie. But that night, as he lay in his own bed listening to the wind howl outside, Wyatt couldn't shake the image of honey-colored eyes and dark hair spilling across straw. Something had changed the moment he'd opened that stable door. He just didn't know what yet. Morning came cold and bright. Wyatt was already up and dressed when he heard footsteps on the stairs. He'd been awake since before dawn, as was his habit, and had already fed the horses and completed his morning chores. Now he was making breakfast, bacon sizzling in the cast-iron skillet and coffee brewing on the stove. Delilah appeared in the doorway, looking uncertain. She'd clearly done her best to clean up, her face washed and her hair braided neatly down her back. In the morning light he could see just how pretty she was, despite the clothes that hung a bit too loose on her frame from weight lost during her travels. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "The bed was wonderful. I'd forgotten what it felt like to sleep somewhere warm and safe. Coffee's ready if you want some. Breakfast will be done in a minute." They ate together in companionable silence, and Wyatt found himself enjoying the presence of another person in his usually solitary morning routine. When they'd finished, Delilah immediately began clearing the dishes. "You cooked, I'll clean," she said firmly when he started to protest. That's only fair. He watched her work, noting the efficient, practiced way she moved around the kitchen. She'd been telling the truth about knowing how to keep a house. I was thinking, he said as she dried the last dish, if you're serious about wanting to work, I could use help with several things around here. The house could use a thorough cleaning, I'll be the first to admit. And I'm a decent cook, but nothing fancy. If you know how to preserve food for winter, that would be useful too. I've got a garden that's still producing, needs harvesting before the first hard freeze. Delilah nodded eagerly. I can do all of that. My mother taught me how to run a household before she died, and I actually enjoy cooking. It's creative in its own way. There's mending too if you're any good with a needle. I've got a pile of shirts and trousers that need attention. I'm excellent with a needle, she said. I used to do embroidery work, actually. Not that there's much call for fancy stitching out here, I imagine. Probably not, Wyatt agreed with a small grin, but I won't complain if my shirts are mended with fancy stitching. She laughed, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Wyatt realized it was the first time he'd heard her laugh, and he found himself wanting to hear it again. They fell into a routine over the following days. Wyatt handled the ranch work, tending his small herd of cattle and horses, mending fences, and preparing for the coming winter. Delilah threw herself into household tasks with an energy born of gratitude and determination. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, organized the kitchen, and began preparing preserves from the last of the garden harvest. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. Wyatt found himself sharing things he rarely spoke about, stories from his past that he'd kept locked away. He told her about growing up in Tennessee, about his harsh father who'd seen children as free labor and nothing more, about leaving home with nothing but the clothes on his back and the horse he'd raised from a foal. I worked cattle drives for years, he said one night, whittling a piece of wood as they sat together. Saved every penny I could, slept on the ground, ate whatever was put in front of me, and dreamed of having my own piece of land someday. It took me 8 years to save enough to buy this place. You should be proud, Delilah said softly. She was mending one of his shirts, her needle flashing in the firelight. You built something from nothing. That takes incredible strength and determination. I suppose. Though sitting here now talking to you, I realize how lonely I've been out here. I told myself I liked the solitude, that I didn't need anyone, but maybe I was just afraid. Afraid of what? Of letting anyone close enough to hurt me again, Wyatt admitted. My father, he did a number on me and my brothers, made us feel like we'd never be good enough, never measure up. I left to escape that, but I guess I carried it with me. Delilah set down her mending and looked at him directly. You're good enough, Wyatt, more than good enough. You took in a stranger without hesitation, offered help without expecting anything in return. That speaks to who you are as a man. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that went deeper than mere gratitude or friendship. Wyatt felt it settle into his bones, warm and undeniable. Tell me something, he said. If you could do anything, go anywhere, what would you choose? Delilah considered the question carefully. I'd want to build a life that's truly mine, not one dictated by my father's ambitions or society's expectations. I'd want to wake up each morning and make my own choices, even small ones. What to cook for breakfast, what book to read, whether to spend the afternoon in the garden or learning something new. Freedom, I suppose, real freedom. You could have that here, Wyatt said quietly, if you wanted to stay. Her eyes widened. Wyatt, I've already imposed on your hospitality for nearly 2 weeks. You haven't imposed. You've worked harder than any hired hand I could have found in town. The house has never been cleaner, I've never eaten better, and I've enjoyed your company more than I can say. He set down his whittling, giving her his full attention. "I'm not proposing anything improper. I'm just saying if you need a place to stay while you figure out your next step, you're welcome here, for as long as you need." Delilah's throat worked as she swallowed hard. "People will talk. A single woman living with a single man, unchaperoned. Your reputation will suffer." "I don't care much about what people think," Wyatt said honestly. "Never have. But if it bothers you, we could arrange something more formal. I could hire you as my housekeeper, make it official. Pay you a wage even." "I don't want your money," Delilah said quickly. "You've already given me so much." "Then just stay," Wyatt said. "As a friend. As someone who needs a safe place to land for a while, stay and let yourself heal from whatever hurt you've been carrying." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the desire to accept warring with her fear of becoming a burden. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she whispered. "I'll stay a while longer, but I'm going to continue pulling my weight around here. I won't be a freeloader." "Deal," Wyatt said, relief flooding through him. He wasn't ready to examine too closely why the thought of her leaving had bothered him so much. As October faded into November, their life together took on a comfortable rhythm. Wyatt continued his ranch work, and Delilah maintained the household with skill and care. But more than that, they became friends. They talked for hours by the fire each evening, sharing their histories, their dreams, their fears. Delilah told him about her mother, who had died when she was 15, and how much she missed having someone who truly understood her. Wyatt shared memories of his brothers, whom he hadn't seen in over a decade, and wondered aloud what had become of them. Sometimes on clear afternoons, Wyatt would take Delilah riding across the prairie. She'd admitted she didn't know how to ride well, having only been on horseback a few times in her carefully controlled life back east. He taught her patiently, steadying her as she learned to adjust to the horse's gait, praising her progress as she grew more confident. "You're a natural," he said one day as they walked the horses through the brown grass, the November wind whipping around them. "You just needed the chance to try." "I like it," Delilah said, her cheeks flushed from the cold and exercise. "I like the freedom of it, like I could just keep riding and never stop." "Where would you go?" Wyatt asked. She turned to look at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. "Maybe nowhere. Maybe I'd realize I was already where I wanted to be." They were crossing a difficult line. Wyatt knew. What had started as simple hospitality was becoming something more complicated, something deeper. He found himself watching for her smiles, listening for her laughter. He loved the way she hummed while she cooked, the way she'd curl up in the chair by the fire with a book, the way she'd seek his opinion on small matters as if his thoughts truly mattered to her. And he could see, in the way she looked at him sometimes when she thought he wasn't paying attention, that maybe she was feeling something similar. It all came to a head one cold evening in late November. A storm had blown in, bringing with it freezing rain and howling wind. They'd spent the day indoors, Wyatt catching up on repairs to his tack while Delilah baked bread and experimented with a new stew recipe. The house was warm and cozy, the fire crackling cheerfully despite the weather's fury outside. After dinner, they sat together as usual, Wyatt in his chair and Delilah on the small sofa he'd built. But tonight, the conversation had grown quiet, replaced by a comfortable silence that nevertheless felt charged with unspoken things. "Delilah," Wyatt said finally, setting aside the bridle he'd been oiling, "I need to tell you something." She looked up from her book, her expression open and trusting. "What is it?" He took a breath, knowing he was about to risk everything but unable to stay silent any longer. "These past weeks with you here, they've been some of the best of my life. I know that probably sounds strange given how we met, given the circumstances, but it's true." Having you here, talking with you, sharing meals and stories, and just existing together, it's made me realize how empty my life was before." Delilah set her book aside, her full attention on him now. "I think I'm falling in love with you," Wyatt continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Hell, I think I might already be there. I know I have no right to feel this way, that you came here seeking shelter and safety, not romance. But I can't keep pretending what I feel is just friendly concern. It's more than that. You're more than that." The silence that followed felt like it lasted an eternity. Wyatt prepared himself for rejection, for her to say she needed to leave, that he'd overstepped and made her uncomfortable. Instead, Delilah stood and crossed the space between them. She knelt beside his chair, taking his weathered hands in her smaller ones. "Wyatt," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been so afraid to even think it, let alone say it. I came here running from a man who wanted to control me, to make me into something I'm not. I swore I wouldn't let anyone have that kind of power over me again. But what you're offering, what I feel when I'm with you, it's nothing like that." "What is it then?" he asked quietly. "It's partnership. It's respect. It's someone who sees me as I truly am and doesn't want to change me. It's feeling safe and cherished and free all at once." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I love you, Wyatt Northwood. I think I started falling for you the night you found me in your stable and showed me more kindness than I'd been shown in years. I just didn't dare believe it could be real." Wyatt reached out, cupping her face gently in his palm. "It's real, Delilah, more real than anything I've ever felt." He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but she didn't. Instead, she rose up to meet him halfway. Their lips met softly at first, tentative, exploring. Then the kiss deepened, becoming something urgent and profound, a claiming and a promise all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Wyatt rested his forehead against hers, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he felt. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, give you the romance you deserve. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I want to marry you, build a life with you, grow old watching sunsets from the porch and sharing stories by the fire." "I want that too," Delilah whispered. "All of it with you." They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other and the warmth of mutual love and understanding. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside they were safe and warm and home. The next weeks were a golden time, despite the deepening cold of early winter. They continued their routine, but now it was suffused with affection and romance. Wyatt would steal kisses while Delilah was cooking, making her laugh and swat at him with a towel. Delilah would surprise him with his favorite meals and leave little notes in his coat pockets for him to find during the day. In mid-December, Wyatt rode into Newton to visit the general store and came back with a small velvet box hidden in his saddlebag. That evening after dinner, he asked Delilah to walk with him despite the cold. They stood together in the yard, the winter stars brilliant overhead in the clear, frozen sky. Wyatt took both her hands in his. "Delilah Rae," he said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "I know we haven't known each other long by conventional standards. It's only been about 2 months since I found you in my stable. But I also know, with absolute certainty, that you're the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. You're my best friend, my partner, the love of my life. So I'm asking you, will you marry me? Will you build a future with me here on this land, raise a family with me, and let me spend every day trying to make you as happy as you've made me?" He pulled out the ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had cost him most of his savings but was worth every penny. Delilah's face was radiant even in the starlight. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure despite the tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Wyatt, I'll marry you. There's nothing I want more." He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that was all joy and promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were laughing and crying at once. "I never thought I could be this happy," Delilah said, studying the ring on her finger. "When I was sleeping in your stable that night, I was at the lowest point of my life. I'd lost everything. I was alone and scared and so tired. And then you appeared, this kind man who asked nothing of me except to be myself. You saved me, Wyatt." "We saved each other," Wyatt said, pulling her close against the cold. "I was existing, not living. You showed me the difference." They decided to marry quickly, not wanting to wait. On a cold day just after Christmas in 1876, they stood before a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Newton. Wyatt wore his best shirt, freshly mended by Delilah's skilled hands. Delilah wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself from fabric. Wyatt had bought as an early Christmas present, along with wildflowers he'd found preserved in a hothouse in town. There were no guests, just the two of them and the preacher in the small church. But it didn't matter. As they spoke their vows, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their days, Wyatt felt a sense of rightness settle into his soul. This was what he'd been waiting for all his life without knowing it. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Wyatt kissed Delilah with all the love and tenderness he possessed. She was his now, and he was hers, bound together by choice and love, and the unshakable conviction that they'd found something rare and precious. Their first winter as a married couple was harsh, with heavy snows and bitter cold. But inside their home, there was warmth and laughter and love. They spent long evenings by the fire, Wyatt teaching Delilah to play chess with a set he'd carved himself, Delilah reading aloud from the few books they owned. They talked about their plans for the spring, about expanding the ranch, maybe adding some chickens and a larger garden. In the deep privacy of their bedroom, they discovered each other with wonder and patience, building intimacy brick by brick. Wyatt was gentle and attentive, always ensuring Delilah's comfort and pleasure. She responded with a passion and trust that humbled him, giving herself fully without reservation. "I love you," she would whisper in the darkness, curled against his chest as the wind howled outside. "I love the life we're building together." "I love you too," he would respond, holding her close. Every single day, more than the last. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted, the prairie turned green, and life renewed itself. Wyatt and Delilah worked side by side, planting the garden, tending the cattle, making improvements to the ranch. They acquired chickens as planned, and Delilah declared herself in love with the silly birds despite their tendency to escape the coop at inopportune moments. In May, Delilah realized she was carrying their first child. She told Wyatt one evening over dinner, her eyes bright with joy and a little fear. "Are you sure?" he asked, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair. "As sure as I can be," she said. "I've had all the signs. The baby should come in late December or early January, I think." Wyatt pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with emotion. "A baby, our baby. God, Delilah, I can hardly believe it. Are you happy?" she asked, searching his face. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," he said fervently. "You've given me everything. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I'm the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Wyatt was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying that Delilah was working too hard or not eating enough. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, knowing it came from love. "Wyatt, I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she would laugh when he tried to carry everything for her or insisted she rest more. "I know, but I can't help wanting to take care of you," he'd respond, looking so earnest that she couldn't be annoyed. They spent long summer evenings on the porch Wyatt had expanded that spring, watching the sunset and talking about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the future they were building. "I want our children to know they're loved unconditionally," Wyatt said one night, his hand resting on Delilah's growing belly. "I want them to know they can be whoever they're meant to be, that we'll support them no matter what." "They will," Delilah assured him. "We're going to give them everything we didn't have. Love, security, freedom to grow and explore. They're going to have a good life, Wyatt." In late October, nearly a year after they'd first met, Wyatt took Delilah out to the stable. He'd been working on a surprise for weeks, and it was finally ready. "Close your eyes," he instructed, leading her carefully through the door. When he told her to open them, she gasped. He'd partitioned off a section of the stable and converted it into a beautiful space with painted walls, a rug on the floor, and comfortable furniture. On one wall hung a wooden sign he'd carved himself. "Where it all began," Delilah read aloud, her voice catching. "Wyatt, this is beautiful. I thought we could turn it into a reading room, or maybe a playroom for the baby eventually," he explained. "I wanted to honor the place where we met, where our story started. That stall where I found you sleeping, scared and alone, that's where my whole life changed. I wanted to make it into something special." Delilah threw her arms around him as much as her pregnant belly would allow. "I love it. I love you. This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." They stood together in that transformed space, holding each other, remembering that October night when a desperate young woman had sought shelter in a stranger's stable and found instead a home, a love, and a future beyond her wildest dreams. Winter came again, their second together. On a clear, cold night in early January of 1878, Delilah went into labor. Wyatt had arranged for a midwife from town to come when the time arrived, and she proved worth every penny of her fee, guiding Delilah through the long hours with competence and compassion. Wyatt stayed by his wife's side the entire time, holding her hand, offering her water and encouragement, refusing to leave even when the midwife suggested he might be more comfortable waiting downstairs. When Delilah's pain was at its worst, when she gripped his hand hard enough to leave bruises and cried out despite her efforts to stay quiet, Wyatt felt each one like a knife to his heart. "You're doing so well," he murmured, pressing kisses to her damp forehead. "You're the strongest person I know. Our baby is going to be here soon, and everything will be all right." Finally, as dawn was breaking on a new day, their son came into the world. He announced his arrival with a lusty cry that made both parents laugh through their tears. The midwife cleaned him, wrapped him in a soft blanket, and placed him in Delilah's arms. "He's perfect," Delilah breathed, staring down at their son with wonder. "Wyatt, look at him. He's absolutely perfect." Wyatt gazed down at the tiny face, the small fists waving in the air, the tuft of dark hair on his head, and felt his heart expand in a way he hadn't known was possible. This was his son, his and Delilah's, a new life created from their love. "What should we name him?" he asked softly. They discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never settled on one definitively. Now, looking at their boy, Delilah said, "What about William? After your middle name, we could call him Will." "William Northwood," Wyatt said, testing it out. "I like that. Will Northwood." "Welcome to the world, son." The baby blinked up at them, his unfocused gaze seeming to take in his parents' faces. Wyatt reached out and gently touched his son's tiny hand. Immediately, Will's fingers curled around his father's much larger one, gripping tight. "He's already got a good grip," Wyatt said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's going to be strong like his mother." "And kind like his father," Delilah added, leaning against Wyatt's shoulder as exhaustion caught up with her. The midwife showed them how to care for the baby, how to change and feed and comfort him. After she left, assuring them she'd check back in a few days, Wyatt and Delilah were alone with their son. Those first weeks were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Will prove to be a good baby overall, though he had his fussy moments like any infant. Wyatt took to fatherhood with enthusiasm, waking for nighttime feedings, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just watching his son sleep with an expression of such profound love that it made Delilah's heart ache. "You're a natural," she told him one morning, watching as he cradled Will against his chest, the baby's ear pressed to his father's heartbeat. "I'm terrified every single moment that I'm doing something wrong," Wyatt admitted, "but I've never been happier. Is that strange?" "Not at all," Delilah said, moving to join them. She wrapped her arms around Wyatt from behind, and the three of them stood together like that, a family complete and whole. As Will grew from an infant into a chubby, cheerful baby who smiled readily and loved to be carried around the ranch to see the horses and chickens, Wyatt and Delilah's love deepened further. They'd weathered the challenges of new parenthood together, learning to communicate even when exhausted, to share responsibilities, to support each other through difficult moments. One evening in late spring, after they'd put Will to bed and were relaxing on the porch in the cool twilight, Delilah said, "I was thinking about something today." "What's that?" Wyatt asked, reaching over to take her hand. "It's been almost 2 years since I ran away from Boston. 2 years since I slept in your stable and you changed my life. And I realized I haven't thought about my father or Charles or any of that in months. That part of my life feels like it happened to someone else. You think they're still looking for you?" Wyatt asked, a thread of concern in his voice. "Maybe, though I doubt it," Delilah said thoughtfully. "My father is stubborn, but he's also practical. By now he probably assumes I'm dead or so far gone he'll never find me. Either way, I'm free of him, free of all of it." She squeezed Wyatt's hand. "I'm Delilah Northwood now, wife and mother, living on a ranch in Kansas. The life I have now, it's so far removed from anything they could have predicted. And I love it, every single part of it. Even the hard parts," Wyatt teased gently. "The leaky roof we need to fix, the fence that keeps falling down, the chickens that insist on laying eggs everywhere except the nesting boxes," Delilah laughed. "Especially those parts, because they are ours. We're building this life together, solving problems together, creating something real and lasting. That means more to me than all the luxury and ease I left behind." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the prairie sounds, the distant lowing of cattle and the chirp of crickets. Finally, Wyatt said, "I have something I want to tell you." "All right," Delilah said, turning to look at him. "Last month, when I was in town, I went to see a lawyer. I wanted to make sure everything was legal and proper, that the ranch would be yours and Will's if anything ever happened to me. The lawyer helped me draw up papers making it all official." Delilah's breath caught. "Wyatt, you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said firmly. "This ranch, everything I have, it's as much yours as it is mine. More, actually, because you've made it into a real home. Before you, it was just land and buildings. You brought life to it, love. I wanted to make sure that was recognized legally, that you'd be protected." Tears gathered in Delilah's eyes. "You keep finding ways to show me I made the right choice in loving you." "That works both ways," Wyatt said, pulling her close. "Every day with you is a gift I don't take for granted." The years that followed were full and rich. Will grew into a bright, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the ranch, trying to help with chores in his clumsy, endearing way. In the spring of 1880, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. This time she carried the baby through a hot Kansas summer, And in October, almost exactly 4 years after she and Wyatt had met, she gave birth to a daughter. "She's beautiful," Wyatt breathed, cradling his newborn daughter with the same awe he'd shown when Will was born. "She looks just like you." "She has your nose," Delilah countered, though she was smiling. They named her Sarah Elizabeth, and she proved to be a calm, observant baby who seemed to take everything in with wide, curious eyes. Will was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes. "Gentle," Wyatt would remind him as Will patted Sarah's head with more enthusiasm than finesse. "She's still very small." "I be careful, Papa," Will would insist in his toddler speech. "I good big brother." And he was. As Sarah grew, the bond between the siblings deepened. Will was protective of his little sister, and Sarah adored her big brother, her face lighting up whenever he entered the room. Wyatt and Delilah watched their children grow with pride and joy, marveling at the family they'd created. The ranch prospered as well. Wyatt expanded the herd and improved the land, while Delilah managed the household and took over keeping the ranch's books, discovering she had a talent for figures and organization. They had their challenges, of course. There was the harsh winter of 1881, when they lost several head of cattle to the cold and had to be very careful with their supplies. There was the summer drought the following year that tested their resources and their resilience. But they faced everything together, supporting each other through the difficult times and celebrating the victories. In the autumn of 1883, when Will was 5 and Sarah nearly 3, Wyatt surprised Delilah with a new addition to the house. He'd spent months working on it in secret with the help of a builder from town, and when he finally showed it to her, she cried. "A library," she breathed, standing in the doorway of the new room he'd added. Shelves lined the walls, already populated with books he'd been secretly collecting. There was a comfortable chair by the window, perfect for reading, and a desk where she could write letters or work on the household accounts. "You've always loved books," Wyatt said, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I wanted to give you a space that was just yours, where you could read and think and have some peace." "Wyatt Northwood," Delilah said, turning in his arms to face him. "How did I get so lucky as to find you?" "Pretty sure I'm the lucky one," he said, kissing her softly. "You took a chance on a rough cowboy who found you sleeping in his stable. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that trust." "You already are," she assured him. "Every single day." As their children grew older, Wyatt and Delilah made sure to pass on the values that mattered to them. They taught Will and Sarah to work hard, to be kind, to stand up for what was right. They encouraged curiosity and learning, buying books whenever they could afford them and answering endless questions about how things worked and why the world was the way it was. They also made sure to tell their children the story of how they met, though they softened some of the details for young ears. Will and Sarah loved hearing about the night Mama had needed a place to stay, and Papa had offered her shelter. "And then you fell in love," Sarah would say with the certainty of a child who believed in happy endings. "We did," Delilah would confirm, exchanging a warm glance with Wyatt. "We fell very much in love." In 1885, another addition joined the family, a second son they named James. By this time, Will was 7 and Sarah was 5, both old enough to be genuinely helpful with the new baby. The house rang with laughter and noise, with the sound of children playing and growing and living fully. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Wyatt would look around at his full house, his thriving ranch, his wife and children, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. He thought about the lonely man he'd been before that October night in 1876, going through the motions of living but not truly alive. He thought about how close he'd come to never knowing this joy if Delilah had chosen a different stable, a different town, a different path. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked one such evening, coming up beside him as he stood on the porch watching the sunset. "Just how grateful I am," Wyatt said, pulling her close. "For you, for our children, for this life we've built. I never imagined I could be this happy." "Neither did I," Delilah admitted. She rested her head on his shoulder, both of them listening to the sounds of their children playing in the yard before dinner. "When I ran away from Boston, I was just trying to survive. I didn't dare hope for happiness. But then I found you, or you found me, and everything changed." "Best night of my life," Wyatt said, "opening that stable door and finding you there." "Best night of mine, too," Delilah agreed. "Even though I was terrified and exhausted and convinced my life was over, turns out it was just beginning." They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the Kansas sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Behind them, their children laughed and played. Inside the house, dinner was waiting to be served at the table Wyatt had built with his own hands. This was their life, hard-won and deeply cherished, built on a foundation of love and trust and the simple kindness of a cowboy who'd offered shelter to a stranger. The years continued to unfold, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. They lost Wyatt's favorite horse to old age and mourned together. They celebrated when Will learned to read, when Sarah mastered horseback riding, when James spoke his first word. They weathered illness and injury, good harvests and poor ones, moments of plenty and times of scarcity. Through it all, their love remained constant, the bedrock on which everything else was built. They still talked by the fire in the evenings, still stole moments alone when they could, still looked at each other across crowded rooms and smiled secret smiles that were theirs alone. In 1890, when Will turned 12, he asked his father to teach him everything about running the ranch. Wyatt agreed with pride, taking his son out each day to learn about cattle and horses, about the land and how to care for it, about the business of ranching. Will proved to be a quick study, already showing the dedication and work ethic his parents valued. Sarah, meanwhile, developed a passion for cooking and began experimenting with recipes, much to Delilah's delight. The two of them would spend hours in the kitchen together, talking and laughing as they created meals for the family. Sarah also showed artistic talent, drawing and painting whenever she had free time. James, the youngest, was still finding his way, but he showed early signs of being a natural with animals. He could calm spooked horses and seemed to communicate with the ranch dogs in ways that amazed everyone. "They're good kids," Wyatt said to Delilah one night after they'd tucked James into bed and checked on the older two who were allowed to stay up a bit later. "We did good." "We did," Delilah agreed. "They're growing up so fast, though, sometimes I miss when they were little." "We could always have another," Wyatt suggested with a teasing grin. Delilah laughed and swatted his arm. "I think 3 is plenty, thank you very much. Besides, I'm 40 years old. My childbearing days are behind me and I'm perfectly content with that." "Fair enough," Wyatt said, pulling her close. "I'm content with everything exactly as it is, but life had more changes in store." In 1892, a family moved onto the neighboring property that had been vacant for years. The Reynolds family consisted of a couple in their 40s and their 17-year-old daughter, Anna. They were from Missouri, farmers looking for fresh land and new opportunities. Wyatt and Delilah welcomed the new neighbors warmly, helping them get settled and inviting them for dinner. Over the following months, the two families grew close. Will, now 14, developed a friendship with Anna that his parents watched with knowing smiles. "Remember when we were young and falling in love?" Delilah murmured to Wyatt as they watched Will and Anna talking and laughing together during a summer picnic. "We're still young," Wyatt protested. "I'm only 42. "Young at heart, then," Delilah amended. "But yes, it does bring back memories. The way he looks at her, it reminds me of how you looked at me." "How do I look at you?" Wyatt asked. "Like I'm your whole world," Delilah said softly. "That's because you are," Wyatt replied, kissing her temple. As the 1890s progressed, the family continued to grow and change. The ranch prospered, allowing them some financial security they'd never had before. Wyatt was able to hire a couple of ranch hands to help with the heavier work, which eased the burden on him as he aged. Delilah's library grew, and she began teaching reading and writing to some of the children from neighboring ranches, discovering a passion for education. In 1896, when Sarah was 16, she announced she wanted to become a teacher. Wyatt and Delilah discussed it at length and decided to send her to the teaching college in Emporia, Kansas. It was hard to see their daughter leave home, but they were proud of her ambition and determination. Will, now 18, had taken on more responsibility at the ranch and showed every sign of being ready to run it someday. His relationship with Anna Reynolds had deepened, and Wyatt suspected a proposal was coming soon. James, at 11, was the only child still fully at home, and both parents treasured the time with him, knowing from experience how quickly childhood passed. One evening in late 1896, Wyatt took Delilah back out to the stable, to the special room he'd made 20 years earlier. Over the years, it had served various purposes, but they'd always kept it, a reminder of their beginning. 20 years, Wyatt said, looking around the space. 20 years since I found you here, scared and alone and needing help. 20 years since you showed me more kindness than anyone in my life had before, Delilah said. 20 years since my life truly began. I was thinking, Wyatt said, maybe we should update this space, turn it into something the grandchildren could use someday. Because if I'm reading the signs right, Will is going to propose to Anna soon, and we might have grandbabies in a few years. Grandbabies, Delilah repeated, a smile spreading across her face. I can hardly believe we're old enough to be grandparents. Speak for yourself, Wyatt said. I'm still in my prime. She laughed and swatted at him playfully, the way she'd been doing for 2 decades. He caught her hand and pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion and tenderness he'd shown on their wedding day. I love you, Delilah Northwood, he said against her lips. 20 years, and I love you more now than I did the day we married. I love you too, she replied, with everything I am. You gave me the world, Wyatt. Safety, love, family, purpose, freedom. You gave me myself. They held each other in that space where it all began. 2 people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting. Sure enough, in the spring of 1897, Will asked permission to marry Anna Reynolds. Wyatt gave his blessing gladly, seeing in the young couple's eyes the same love and commitment he shared with Delilah. The wedding was held at the ranch in June, a joyful celebration attended by neighbors and friends from all around Newton. Watching Will and Anna exchange their vows, Delilah leaned against Wyatt, tears of happiness streaming down her face. Our baby is married, she whispered. He's a man now, Wyatt agreed, his own voice thick with emotion. And he chose well. Anna will be a good partner for him, just like you've been for me. Will and Anna built a small house on the far side of the ranch, close enough to help with the work but with their own space for privacy. In 1898, they welcomed their first child, a son they named Matthew. Wyatt and Delilah were besotted grandparents, doting on little Matthew and marveling at the continuation of their family line. Sarah finished her teaching course and took a position at the schoolhouse in Newton. boarding with a respectable family during the week and coming home on weekends. She was passionate about her work, full of stories about her students and the challenges and rewards of teaching. James, now in his teenage years, had decided he wanted to be a veterinarian. It was an ambitious goal, requiring education they'd have to save for, but Wyatt and Delilah were determined to support their youngest son's dreams the way they'd supported Sarah's. In 1900, the new century dawned with promise. The ranch was thriving under the combined efforts of Wyatt and Will. Sarah was engaged to a kind young man named Thomas who worked at the bank in Newton. James was preparing to go to Kansas State Agricultural College to study veterinary medicine. And Will and Anna had just announced they were expecting their second child. On a warm evening that spring, Wyatt and Delilah sat on their porch as they'd done countless times over the years. They were older now, with gray threading through their hair and lines marking their faces. But they sat close together, holding hands, as connected as they'd been when they first fell in love. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Delilah asked, gesturing to the ranch spread out before them. "All those years ago when you found me in your stable, honestly." "No," Wyatt admitted. "I thought I'd help you get back on your feet and you'd move on. I never dreamed you'd stay, that you'd love me, that we'd build all this together." "Best decision I ever made, staying," Delilah said. "Running away from Boston was an act of survival. But staying here with you, that was a choice made from love, and it's the choice I'd make again and again." "I'd make the same choice," Wyatt said. "Opening that stable door, offering you shelter, falling in love with you, marrying you, building this life. I'd do it all exactly the same way." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Behind them, in the house they'd filled with love and laughter for over 2 decades, their family would soon gather for dinner. Will and Anna would come with Matthew and whatever stories they had from their day. Sarah might stop by if she was home from Newton. James would appear from wherever he'd been, probably the barn with the animals he loved. This was their legacy, Wyatt and Delilah's. Not just the land or the buildings or the material success, though those mattered. Their real legacy was love, the kind that transformed lives and created families and echoed through generations. It was the legacy of a cowboy who'd shown kindness to a stranger and a young woman who'd had the courage to accept it. It was the legacy of 2 people who'd chosen each other, day after day, year after year, through every challenge and triumph. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Wyatt turned to Delilah and said, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked. "For sleeping in my stable that October night. For giving me the chance to know you, to love you. For 24 years of happiness I never thought I'd find. For our children and the life we've built. For everything." Delilah smiled, that same smile that had captured his heart so long ago. "Thank you for finding me. For seeing past the scared, desperate woman in your stable to the person underneath. For offering me shelter and never asking for anything in return. For loving me exactly as I am." They kissed then, a soft, sweet kiss full of history and promise. When they pulled apart, they stood together and walked hand in hand back into their home, into the warmth and light and love that filled every corner. The years would continue to unfold, bringing new joys and inevitable sorrows. They would watch their children have children of their own, would celebrate weddings and births and achievements. They would face losses too, as all families must, the natural passages of life and death that mark the human experience. But through it all, Wyatt and Delilah would face everything together, their love the constant thread binding their story. They would grow old on that Kansas ranch, watching sunsets from their porch and telling their grandchildren stories of the old days. of how the West had been wild and dangerous, but also full of opportunity and hope. And they would always remember that October night in 1876, when a cowboy found a young woman sleeping in his stable, when she apologized, but he said to stay as long as she needed. That moment had changed everything, had set them both on a path they never could have imagined. It was the moment when two lost souls found each other and created something neither could have built alone. It was the moment their story truly began, a story of love and courage and the incredible power of kindness to transform lives. As they aged into their 60s and beyond, their love only deepened. They were partners in every sense, working together, supporting each other through the aches and pains of aging bodies, celebrating as their grandchildren grew and began families of their own. In 1910, on a beautiful autumn day much like the one when they'd first met, Wyatt and Delilah celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch house was full of noise and laughter and love, exactly as they'd always hoped it would be. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, they returned to their familiar spots on the porch. The Kansas prairie stretched out before them, unchanged in its essential nature despite all the years that had passed. 33 years, Delilah mused, and it still feels like not nearly enough time. We'll take whatever we get, Wyatt said, squeezing her hand. And we'll make every moment count, just like we always have. I have no regrets, Delilah said quietly. None at all. This life, this family, this love, it's more than I ever dreamed possible. Same here, Wyatt agreed. You know what the best part is? What? I still get excited when I see you walk into a room. My heart still skips when you smile at me. After all these years, all these thousands of days together, I'm still not tired of you. I still want more. Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder, both of them older and slower but still fundamentally the same people who'd fallen in love in this very place so many years ago. That's because what we have is real, she said. It's not based on fantasy or infatuation. It's built on true partnership, on respect and trust and genuine friendship along with the romance. You're right, Wyatt said. You're always right, she laughed softly. Not always. But I'm right about this. We did it right, Wyatt. We built something that lasted. They sat together as night fell, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill, surrounded by the sounds of the prairie. Neither spoke of the future or worried about how many years they might have left. They simply existed in that moment, grateful for what they'd been given, for the chance meeting that had changed both their lives forever. The story of the cowboy and the young woman he found in his stable had become legend in their family, told and retold to each new generation. But to Wyatt and Delilah, it wasn't a legend. It was simply their life, their truth, their love story. And as they sat together under the stars that night, hands clasped and hearts full, they knew beyond any doubt that they'd found what so many people searched for but never discovered. They'd found home in each other, found purpose in building a life together, found joy in the everyday moments shared with someone who truly understood and cherished them. The cowboy had found her sleeping in his stable. She'd apologized, but he'd said to stay as long as she needed. And she'd stayed not just for days or weeks or months, but for a lifetime. Because sometimes in the kindness of strangers, we find our destiny. Sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, we find exactly what we've been searching for all along. Their love story didn't end that night on the porch, or any night really. It continued through the remaining years of their lives, through seasons of joy and sorrow, through the natural progression of time that carries us all forward. They continued to choose each other, to love each other, to build their life together one day at a time. And when, many years later, they were finally laid to rest side by side in the family plot on the ranch they'd built together, the headstones bore a simple inscription chosen by their children. Together at last, together forever, bound by love that began when kindness opened a stable door. It was the perfect epitaph for a perfect love, the kind that transforms not just two lives but ripples out through generations, creating legacy and meaning and hope. The kind of love that proves, beyond any doubt, that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of kindness, and that true love, when nurtured and cherished, can indeed last forever. Their story lived on in the hearts and memories of their descendants, passed down through the years as both history and inspiration. The ranch continued to thrive, tended by Northwood hands generation after generation. And the stable where it all began was preserved, a monument to the moment when everything changed, when a cowboy's compassion and a young woman's courage combined to create something beautiful and lasting. This was their story, simple in its beginning but profound in its impact. A testament to the power of love, the importance of kindness, and the incredible journey that can unfold when two souls find each other against all odds and choose, every single day, to stay.